So today we're going to talk a little bit about watercolor paints and the cool things that they can do. So these are the things you'll need today: a big brush, a small brush, paper, watercolor paints, and some water. Okay, so I like to call this dry because the paper that I'm painting on is going to be dry. Now my paintbrush is going to be wet, but the paper is going to be dry. And I'll show you a different way in just a second. But you want to use a small paintbrush when you're using watercolor paints because they're small paints, right? And the trick is to make sure you have lots of water on your brush and to make sure that you gently wiggle it in the paints over and over again. And the cool thing about when you're using watercolors on a dry paper is that you can have a lot of control over what you're painting. So that means that the paint isn't gonna move or drip a lot because my paper is dry and my paintbrush is the only thing that's wet. So you can have details in your painting, and like I said, using a small paintbrush is probably best for watercolors like this. So it's almost like you're drawing with a pencil, except for you're obviously using paints. Making sure to wash your brush in between colors. But you can add some really good details because your paper is dry and your paints are not like flowing or dripping. There we go. Okay, so this one is different because it's wet. Now I'm going to take my big paintbrush and I'm going to go ahead and get my whole paper wet first. So I'm just getting water, lots of water on my paper, and you're going to notice that when I start painting with my skinny brush with the watercolors, it's going to have a totally different effect. So let's watch. So hopefully you're noticing that the watercolors are spreading. Because my paper is wet, it's the watercolor paints are getting on the water and they're spreading all over the place. So this is a fun way to paint. However, you need to know that you're not going to have any control over what it's doing because it's liquidy and it's just doing whatever it wants to do. So sometimes artists like to tilt their paper and watch what happens when the water flows and when the paints start moving around. So maybe you could think of something that this would be good for. Or sometimes what artists will do is they'll let this dry, and then when it's dry, they'll take watercolor paints and do the more detailed paintings like you saw in the last part just a second ago. But it is really fun to watch the watercolor paints kind of move around when your paper is really wet. It has a cool effect. This might be good for maybe the ocean or the sky if you wanted to do a sunset type thing. So I've tilted my paper up a little bit and all I'm doing is letting it drip. I'm just touching it and just watching it drip and fall. Maybe I can zoom in a little and you can see it. So that's what happens when your paper is wet first. Let's watch one more. Yeah. So then I'm tilting it. Cool.